You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Gary Bolles. He's the chair of the future of work at Singularity University. Singularity has a lot of great minds working through it. It's an initiative, I believe, by Peter Diamandis, who had created the X Prize. I've spoken to a bunch of Singularity University folks back in the day, and I'm glad to have you, Gary. Thanks for coming.
Listen, really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, that was a very timely call because, you're dealing with the future of work, the future of learning, and, AI seems to be all the rage. I have 3 kids in school, and I can tell you the current learning systems are not all they're cracked up to be, at least from my perspective. But, we'll start with you. So tell me, how and why was this position created for you, or are you filling it at Singularity University?
So Singularity University is a global think tank, completely virtual. I'm not staff, I'm adjunct. The instructor often are, it's called experts, who are brought in for a variety of programs that typically help people, often executives and organizations, to just understand the dynamics of what the founders, Ray Kurzweil, and as you mentioned, Peter Diamandis, call exponential technologies. What are the ways that they impact our organizations, our industries, our lives, and then what are the strategies for being able to use them in positive ways? And the reason I was pulled into focusing on issues related to the future of work originally was because so many of my fellow experts who are deep on everything from, as you say, artificial intelligence, which we can talk about quite a bit, to next generation biology, space, you name it, all these breakthrough technologies, there are continuing implications for the future of work, the future of learning, as you say, with your kids in school, and the future of organizations. And those are my consistent themes. And then Singularity last year built a program for fellows. There are 15 of us, and asked me to expand my focus and really look at transformation. What are some of the issues and strategies that we can follow to transform our industries or organizations and our lives? And so that's where a lot of my focus is now, especially in helping people in the new year to be thinking about, well, what are some of the possibilities as we see this great reset that is impacting so many different facets of our world.
Yeah. I don't mean to turn this to a complaint fest, but I'll tell you a couple of things I'm seeing that I think are really detrimental. And it just seems like it's all Pollyanna, any of the news I hear about education. For instance, I have a friend that used to teach at University of Adelaide in Australia, and he's like, no one goes to class anymore. Nobody. They told teachers that you could do stuff virtually, and you get a big campus with no one in it. He said they'll have like tutorials where people will go ask questions, and those will be 30 to 50% filled. But other than that, there's nobody there, which to me is like awful to be able to just sitting at home and on a computer for 8 hours a day or whatever it may be to learn. Maybe that would be one thing to address is the lack of physical contact in some of these situations where you have smart systems maybe powered by AI, may not, and you have this promise of individualized learning, but you have this lack of societal learning, which again, just personally, I believe is very valuable. What's your thoughts?
So I call this the Great Reset. There's so many different facets of these institutions that we have shaped, human institution, in recent centuries. And if there's 2, well, I'd say 3 that have been impacted the most, it's, as I was saying, it's work. It's what's the function of work in our lives and in our societies and economies. It's the organization itself. What's that structure? What is it, the ways that people interact with each other, which has a lot of the same dynamics that you're talking about. We work as individuals, but we also work as teams and as groups and organizations, and then especially with learning. So just focusing specifically on learning, it's an arena that I've spent a lot of time talking about easily going back 15 years when I co-produced a conference on the future of higher education and talked about what I call the unbundling of higher education. And so if you think of these industrial era model, and so that's really what a lot of our schools, especially what's often called K-12, kindergarten through 12 around the world, if you think of that model, a lot of it was created during the industrial era where we didn't have much technology that was really helping us. And instead, what we did is we stuck a bunch of kids in a classroom, a lot of them, and then only one teacher. And the teacher, to be able to shove as much knowledge and information into their heads as they possibly could, the teacher just did a lot of talking. And then there were books and, that had more of that knowledge. But then students at the end of each year would have to be tested to be allowed to go through the stage gate that we call grade. And so that model might have worked okay during the industrial era when we needed a lot of people to work in factories, but it certainly doesn't work well today. So what would we do if we could wave a magic wand? And as I say, I've written extensively about this, lecture quite a bit, spent a lot of time with heads of universities around the world. And if you were to redesign it around the inevitable growth phases of our lives, the things that we know kids, young people are going to become, they're going to go from little humans to big humans and stages they're going to go through. If we're going to design for the goal that they have in life, the things that they want to do, like be a member of society and have meaningful, well-paid work. And we were constructing for the roles they were going to have. We were going to try to help them to be able to be good citizens, to be parents, to be, good siblings, to be parts of communities. Then we would design the system very, very differently. We would ensure that everybody had the access to great learning tool and resource, right? So sure, individualized learning, wonderful. And in the age of generative artificial intelligence, there's so many different ways that you could be leveraging these tools to be able to help people on an individual basis. But if you decouple that from the social part of learning is best done as a team sport. The research is very, very clear. So what we really need is to have the kinds of situations where we can decouple this thing we call the classroom, which was really designed for this, mass production process. In a lot of colleges, you could argue that a kid sitting with 300 other kids in a lecture hall being lectured at by a professor they will never meet, because the only people they actually meet are the graduate students who themselves went through the same system. You could argue that wasn't an ideal way to learn either. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to design these learning situations where we're factoring for all these different ways that we grow and develop. We grow and develop intellectually, we grow and develop emotionally, and we grow and develop socially. And if we decouple the social piece, then yes, young people and people who are older have lost something very, very important. So that's what's missing right now, is we are not intentionally designing for how we do learning in so many different contexts as a team sport. And that has to be solved. And that's totally solvable.
Well, I was going to ask you about what some of the solutions that have been postulated, but one thing I thought of is, what if you reverse high school? Homework now was done by going to a class and pairing up and interacting with other students. And the classwork was done by learning at home over the computer. So then you have still social interaction, but now the practice and all that and the socialization is different after the materials initially learned. Perhaps that would be a solution instead of all or nothing, all virtual or all in person.
So I totally agree. Those are great potential contexts for the timing, like the when and where people learn. I'd like to add a few more things to it. So one of the first ones is agency. Is that what you most want? The major deliverable for any young learner is to learn how to learn and to fall in love with learning and to want to be motivated and driven by the need to learn. I've got about a dozen courses on LinkedIn Learning, live for adults, but and typically for people in organizations. But about 1.8 million people have taken my courses, and the most popular one is learning mindset in the age of AI. And about 30,000 people a month take the course. And the whole premise is that learning is a mindset. Being infected by a love of learning is a mindset. And whether it's for a very young human being or for a much older human being, the need to be in love with certain topics, with certain functions, with certain ways that we learn is critical. Learning how to learn, so that's the second most popular course I have, which is building a learning skill set. Those are critical deliverables early on. And if we deliver those things, then yes, there's all these different potential contexts for where and when and how especially young minds learn. And if your listeners are interested in additional resources, I recommend the work of my great friend Esther Wojcicki, Wojcicki, who has written 2 great books. If you're interested in the systemic ways to change it, she's written a book called Moonshots in Education, which talks about many of the different characteristics you're talking about in changing, flipping the classroom, changing to the model where young learners have agency. They're the ones in charge of their own learning. And then in the context of, well, then where they apply it, like the ways to be able to help them to develop social and emotional skills and to be functional as humans and engaged in society and in work. She's got a great book called How to Raise Successful People. So these are great resources to be thinking about, well, how as parents, how as people who care about having effective learning systems, how do we design for the age of AI? And if we flip the model, as you're talking about, where especially we are designing specifically for group learning, one of the first things that Esther will tell you is, especially with the new generative AI tools, is you've got to have young people, especially, use these tools in team. It only goes off the rails when a kid goes off on their own and only tries to do their homework on their own, and they tend to do shortcuts. I don't know about you, but I did a lot of shortcuts when I was in school. And it's just, I think it's, human nature. There might be 5 to 10% of young people that are much more driven and focused and, follow all the rules. But, kids are rule manglers. And so instead, if you figure out ways to be able to help them to do this as a team sport, you give them a tool and say, each of you use a different, you 5 kids, each use a different tool. You each research a topic. You have the tool, each write a paper for you. And then the 5 kids get together and they work through where are these tools not telling the truth. These tools are hugely flawed and they make up sources. And all right, so where are they right? Where are they wrong? And then the kids have to work together to merge those 5 different approaches into one paper that they have to write together. And so again, you think of it how we meld in the element of making it a team sport, and then the tools become superpowers. The tools become ways to be able to help kids to augment their existing skills as opposed to replacing.
Well, I mean, education is compelled by the states. If you don't do it, you don't enroll your kids, you can have them taken away from you. Meanwhile, what is happening at the state, with the decision makers at the state level to make sure school is working for, the vast majority of kids, I really don't know. There seems to be a terrible disconnect. Like, I'll give you one example, like with math. I did engineering. Thank goodness I remember enough to be able to help my kids. One was in college, 2 were in high school, but the math learning was pretty much garbage. I mean, they gave them no place to write stuff down. And I don't know how anyone can do math without writing stuff down. Like, I can't. And I have an engineering degree from it. I needed that. I just don't think there's anyone home when it comes to schooling. And there's all this talk of individualized learning and, custom this and custom that. But the end product appears to be worse than, like you said, the 300-person lecture for freshman classes because it lacks also the sociability. So, I mean, who is going to make and then force this change upon people? Like, again, so far, it's just the state.
The first deliverable is always engaged parents, but hopefully informed and engaged parents, because they're often the ones that care the most about their kids getting a great education. The second is informed and engaged people at the local, state, and national level that are empowered, that feel that they're empowered to be able to try to shift a lot of the industrial era context towards much more of an adaptive learning model. And the good news is that there are inspiring examples all around the world. If you look at the system of Finland, for instance, what Finland has done is it treats teachers first and foremost as professionals. It pays them very, very well. It's a sought after role. Teachers are treated as if they are deeply knowledgeable about how it is that young minds learn. The first couple of years are focused on play. It's not about having an academic kindergarten, which is one of the world's worst oxymorons. It's about helping kids to be kids and to build social skills and to learn how to be around each other and to solve problems together. And then then over time, it injects more and more of the learning process around specific topics and specific skills, but ensures that they have the right kind of tools and resources. So totally agree. The more we stay anchored in a lot of these processes, so if you're doing math and you don't have a way to physically write things down, or you're not encouraging young people to be able to not just learn keyboarding, but to be able to learn handwriting and to be able to, again, do these things together with each other, to do them in creative ways. The more that we infect kids with a love of learning a topic, even that might have some speed bumps for them. Not every kid loves math initially, but lots of kids love different things. Kids might love dinosaurs. They might love design. So if you can teach a topic, math, the length of dinosaurs and so on. All these things are opportunities to be able to change the context of the learning model. The problem is that at a national level, what ends up happening is countries like America over and over again, you follow the old rules of learning. They think that we need to create these stage gates and that having kids all learning exactly the same thing at exactly the same time in exactly the same way is the deliverable. And the inspiring examples from around the world don't approach them that way. They approach them in much more creative and collaborative ways.
So what does it look like for, like the best models that you've seen? I'm sure you've seen many. Like, what does the day of education look like for them?
So I want to make sure I'm being clear. First off, these are very high-class problems to discuss because we can say what we think is the ideal model, but then the reality of countries around the world, especially developing economies, we do a lot of work in Latin America. I'm involved in a number of initiatives that are working with learners and educators in developing economies. And what ends up happening is we can posit what the ideal is, but then you need both the resources and then you need systems change. You need to be able to, at the ground level, have access. And so this is one of the biggest challenges is that we're positing all these wonderful things, for instance, that generative AI software can do. We're positing all the wonderful things it could do if you had teachers who were very well trained in these mechanisms. But a lot of countries don't have those resources, or they're not spending the resources in the most effective ways. They also have, even in America, we've got a lot of teachers who were trained in the old rules of learning. That's what they know. And unless we help them to be able to be trained in the next, what I call the next rules of learning, then they're still anchored. They're mired in these old systems. And then at the macro level, the laws and regulations of countries like America are still encouraging these things like teaching to the test and so on. So what could an ideal day look like for a young person? You still have a tremendous opportunity to be able to go and be in person with other kids, but that might be in the context of just learning. That might be a couple of hours a day, but there also is time for play. There's also time for exploration. There's also time for being outside the classroom and doing activities that get you engaged in the real world, engaged in nature, engaged in your community, and finding real world problems to understand, finding people to be able to learn from in the community that are not just inside the classroom context. And then the classroom is where you go to synthesize learning. It's where you go to collaborate with others. So, and then normally, depending upon the age, you want to find that passion-based topic or two that kids are all in on and encourage it. Whether it's dinosaurs or design or cars or whatever it is that a kid falls in love with, then having the capacity to be able to adapt the pedagogy, the learning into that context. And this is a place, for example, where the generative AI tools are marvelous. If you give let's say you've got a curriculum, you've got something you wanted to teach this week as a teacher, and you've got 15 different learners or 15 different topics that they want to learn from, you can literally feed into these generative AI tools, especially the new ones that are designed for educators. And you can say, give me 15 different approaches to learning this particular topic. So let's say it's learning fraction. Give me 15 different ways to approach teaching fractions with these 15 different things that kids are fascinated by. And that saves the teacher a tremendous amount of time, sparks a lot of learning for the kids. And then over time, you can even let the kids have access to the tools and have them ask, what are different ways I could be learning this topic with this thing that I'm passionate about? And so that kind of personalized learning is tremendously enabled by these tools, but you need to have guardrails because, again, the tools are imperfect. You don't want kids just going off on their own. Sure, there's, some kids are going to be, they're going to be very, very, they already have agents. They're already fascinated. They're already on their own. They're locked and loaded. They're very introverted potentially, and this is the way that they learn the most. But you really do want it to make it a team sport as much as you possibly can.
Okay. So there are systems that are hybrid where, again, the kids will do the work on their own, let's say on a computer, and then they will collaborate in groups, either virtually or in person, for the homework, for questions, for projects, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And then as you get into college, so for instance, you were talking about the school in Adelaide where nobody goes to class anymore, you've got empty campus. Well, those are all solvable problems, right? So, but the campuses are often not designed for what they really need to be. So one example is at Stanford University, there's a sub-school. It's called the Hasso-Plattner School of Design, and its nickname is D School. And you walk into a classroom in D School, and there is no classroom. It's an empty room. And but what it has is a lot of chairs and tables and whiteboard and materials and toys, all on wheel. And so every class learning situation is designed. You take these basic building blocks and you design the learning environment for what you need to do and learn in this particular moment and for this particular topic and context. And the more you put into the students' hands, the learners' hands, the design of that, well, what are the ways we could be learning this? How would we construct teams? What are the kinds of goals we should have in learning this topic? The more you help to encourage agency, the more you sponsor what I was saying at the beginning, which is a love of learning. You help them to be in charge of their own learning, as opposed to putting it on the shoulders of the teacher who has to somehow come up with some magical way to inspire 30 different kids to all have a love of learning. If we infect kids with that possibility early on, then they learn a mindset and a skill set. The three legs of the stool that I say in my book, The Next Rules of Work, I talk about mindset, skill set, and tool set. And that approach applies whether it's the future of work or the future of learning. Is what's the mindset you want to encourage people to approach when they're trying to solve a problem at work or they're trying to learn a topic in school? What's the skill set you want them to develop? It's not just how to learn, but there's a tremendous range of skills, including social and emotional skills, collaborative skills that you want, especially young minds, to learn. And then what's the tool set? In some cases, for instance, when you're talking about math and engineering, it's a pencil and paper. But in other cases, it could be these generative AI tools, or it could be tools with very, very specific purposes, simulation tools if you're learning chemistry, or whatever the topic is. If you got the right tool set, it's just like solving any problem. If it's just as Abraham Maslow, the famous philosopher and psychologist would say, if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But if you have an incredible range of tools that you can bring to bear as a young learner on different problems, you can literally select them as you would finding the right tool to be able to do carpentry or construction.
Any case studies, particular subject, particular setting, what happened before and after?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just give you an example from a developing economy. So I wrote this up on my LinkedIn newsletter. I said the future of college, the future of education is at a university in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So Sao Paulo is the largest city in Brazil. It gets bigger even than Rio de Janeiro. And there's a startup school that's now 10 years old, just became profitable, was started by some former tech executives who cashed out, and then they said, we've got to change education. And so it's a 4-year school. So imagine this. Kids, even from some of the poorest families in Sao Paulo, they apply. And they've got to pass a certain number of quizzes and then interviews. And then if they get selected for the school, school. It's 4-year school. For the first year, they don't pay anything, nothing. And so what the focus is on is teaching these kids social emotional learning, how to study, how to collaborate with their fellow students. And it's called, by the way, Sao Paulo Tech, SP Tech, and Sao Paulo Technical University. And then the school spends the first year, and there's 1,500 students at the school, by the way, spends the first year getting to know the student. And then years 2 through 4, the students are placed in internships in major companies, not just tech companies, but other companies, big companies, but that need tech workers in their second year. And the company doesn't get to choose what students go in as an intern in their company. The school has figured out what the best fit is and tells the company, hey, you've got to take Jose or you've got to take Maria. These are the right people to be in these, in your working in your company. And then for the next 3 years, the student is both getting their degree and working in the company. And then when they graduate, 95% of the students go to work in the company that they were placed in. And the other 5%, most of them start their own company. So there's a perfect example where you're connecting what it is that we learn and how we'll apply it. And then think about different contexts when they're younger to do the same thing, right? And I'm not saying that we need to train kindergartners as future workers. That's not the answer. What it is it's much more, what are the skills that we need people to develop at different parts of their learning journey? And early on, it is social emotional learning, collaborative skills, problem solving, how to manage your own anger. If we could wave our magic wand and have every kid on the planet have that kind of training, that kind of learning when they're young, then they would have the tool sets they need to be better members of society.
I mean, now with AI handling a lot of, let's say heavy computation things, what skills really are necessary? I mean, so a person can get along with others, work collaboratively great, all that problem solving. But I mean, what kind of jobs are then suitable to someone with that training versus more traditional training?
So there's research in the United States going back to the 1940s. My former mentor, it's an amazing man named Sidney Fine, Dr. Sidney Fine, and he created something called the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, 32,000 jobs that were profiled in the post-World War II America. And he basically separated skills into two different bins. There's skills that are based on knowledge, bodies of information that are anchored or rooted. And I call these know skills, KNOW skills. They're bodies of knowledge that don't transfer really easily from one domain to another. So for instance, if you know how to repair a car engine, that probably won't help you necessarily to be a brain surgeon or vice versa, right? So there's bodies of knowledge that don't really transfer very well. And that's often what a lot of the training, especially in college, has been about in the past. But there's this completely separate set of skills that are very flexible skills, usable in a range of situations. And I call these flex skills. But Sid, Dr. Fine, figured out that, well, those are skills actually that are much more usable in so many different situations. They're now called durable skills. They're called skills that you can use for the rest of your life in virtually any kind of situation. And these are, so I actually talk in my book, in the Next Rules of Work, about 4 skills that I believe are as durable as they get. And it just so happens that I talk about the pace and scale of change, that it's an acronym called PACE. Problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. All right. So problem solvers, because my father was actually ended up becoming the world's career counselor. He was a recovering Episcopalian priest who then shifted his own career in his 40s. And he wrote a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which became the world's career manual. There's 10 million copies in print. He and I started a company to bring his work online before he passed away. But my father's key insight was that if you present yourself to a potential future employer as a problem solver, I get your problems. I get the problems of your customers. I have solved those kinds of problems before. You are far more likely to be hired than the next person who doesn't frame it that way. So the first skill is problem solving and applied in a variety of different domains. The second is adaptive. We live in a world of exponential change. It's going to keep on changing. The jobs that a kid might have coming out of college today are going to be very different jobs tomorrow. And so the more adaptive we can be, the more we learn to continually solve new kinds of problems and adapt as ourselves as well, the more able we will be to solve problems we've never encountered before. We must teach everybody on the planet, and especially young people, to be creative problem solvers. And then finally with empathy. So why that might not sound like it fits the others, right? One of these is not like the others. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is fond of saying that he thinks that empathy is the human superpower. It's our ability to empathize with the person in the cubicle next to us, to empathize with our customer, to empathize with our communities, to empathize with the planet. That is a human superpower. And so if you put all of these together, problem solving, adaptive, creative with empathy, this is how we can solve the kinds of skill set that we can teach. And then there's so many different applications for it in the world of work. They become baseline skills. So for example, entrepreneurship, entrepreneurism, the entrepreneur mindset, which is basically just having the agency to solve a problem that maybe nobody has solved the same way before. What does an entrepreneur do? They fall in love, that's empathy, with the problem of a customer. And then they use creative problem solving to continually adapt the solution for that customer until they have what's known as an MVP, or minimum viable product. And so think of training kids early on, teaching them to be problem solvers, to be adaptive, to be creative, to have empathy. These are all superpower. They're all skills that can be used in so many different situations. And because skills are recombinant, just like human DNA, you combine skills together to be able to solve new problems in new contexts, new ways. These are superpowers that can be durable going into the future. And it doesn't matter whether today you are a customer service rep that answers the phone, or in the future you are training generative AI software to answer the basic questions, or in the future you're a designer of solutions to make customers happy. If you can continually adapt through each of those different phases, then your skills will never be out of style.
Okay. How then will employers know? Like right now, they would rely on, this person went to Harvard, or they have a college education, or they have a high school education. Like kind of these slots that they mentally can put people in. But with these new, hybrids upon hybrids, how's an employer supposed to know who to speak to, who to interview, who to work with?
So we're in a seam. We're in an in-between period right now, where more and more organizations are adopting what is called a skills-based model. That is, if you want the cookbook, I've actually got one on my website on gbolles.com, but I've got a cookbook, a playbook for becoming a skills-based organization. But the basic premise is you change your job descriptions from talking just about tasks, like the steps that people go through, and instead focus on the problems to be solved and the skills that are needed to solve those problems. And you can do this with any work role, from working at the front counter at McDonald's to really, really complex problem solving in engineering. But if you rewrite those job descriptions, the requirements for a work role in the language of the problems to be solved and the skills that are needed, and shift to a skills-based organization, that changes your approach. You're not just looking for these old rules to verify that somebody has a certain amount of college or went to a certain college. I'm fond of saying it, most of the clients that I work for that still follow those old rules, I would never be hired because I don't have enough college to stuff into a thimble. But the model of looking at how many years you've worked in a field, or how much schooling you got at a particular college and what the brand of that college is, those old rules are basically just risk management. If you knew with absolute certainty the next person to walk through the door had the skills that you needed, was the right fit, like a really, really great fit, you would hire them. So you have to shift that mindset and shift the process of how you look for those skills, and then have a much more creative mindset about the ways that you can leverage people coming from completely different backgrounds. There's a marvelous organization called Opportunity at Work, and they say if people without the traditional degree, they call STAR, and that's an acronym for Skilled Through Alternative Routes. So if you become a skills-based organization, and again, you can follow the playbook that I've written, then what you do is you create a model of looking at just the skills that people have and how good they are at those skills, and then matching that up to the people that you're talking to as candidates. Then you have to do it on the other side of the ledger as well. As individuals, we need to understand our own skills. This was something that my father said was the first step in any process of job hunting or career change. In Where Colors Your Parachute, he walks through this process of inventorying your own skills, understanding what your skills are. What skills are you most passionate at using? Which ones are you best at? That intersection, company called, that was a superpower. And so the more you can understand, do that self-inventory and put the work that you have done, the problems that you have solved into the language of skills, then you're much better at being able to approach employers and define for them exactly how you can solve the problems that they have. And if the employer has done their homework and shifted their model so that that's the way that they embrace the information about you, when there's a great match, you're going to have far more effective work for people that get hired.
What about the initial list making of the skills? Like, how's the organization to even know? Maybe it sounds stupid. Of course, they should know. But how do they know what skills are needed for a given position?
Good question. So there's increasingly better and better technology. I'm an advisor to a company out of Brazil called Acaso, ACA.SO. And they are one of the leading organizations that has come up with a skills-based model that can take existing job descriptions or any approaches that organizations have used before and transmogrify them into the language of skills. And then that helps you with hiring. That helps you with assembling teams. We call them teams of tomorrow, so that you have the people with the most complementary skill sets, because very few people work on their own or exclusively on their own. They're often working in some context at least at some point with teams, with other people. And so there's better and better technologies nowadays. And I think of Acaso as one of the leading organizations that has cracked that code. But it takes also a mindset shift. The organization has to change, it has to train managers. I don't typically use that word. I call them team guides. That's actually the topic of my next book, is the team guidebook, where to change that mindset, you're looking at the skills that you need and the complementary skill set to be able to work in the context of a team. So that's a big shift for a lot of organizations, but it's quite doable. And the more organizations pick, especially say jobs they've had a hard time hiring for, and they do start this skills-based journey, then the technologies are just going to keep on getting better and better to be able to help them to become skills-based. And then they can change their hiring practices so that they're looking in the language of skills. IBM did this shift 3 years ago, and more than 50% of the open jobs listed on IBM's website don't require traditional degrees. They are skills-based.
So what's the result of their hiring? Is anyone following it too longitudinally to see job performance versus traditional hire?
Okay, so there's two different issues. The first is how many people actually get hired on skills-based models. And the second is, what is performance? So performance through the roof. Great fits, really, really great flexibility, because that's often what you're looking for. It's not just this very, very narrow set of skills that was trained at a particular university in a particular field, but you want much more versatile thinking. And especially people who are stars, skilled through alternative routes, they've learned so many different things in so many different contexts that they're much more versatile problem solvers. So from a performance standpoint, awesome. However, the problem is exactly what I was talking about. If you don't train that team guide, if you don't change the mindset of what person formerly known as the manager or supervisor, IBM actually only hires 15% of people who came your skill through alternative route, because what they didn't do yet is to change the incentives. If you change the incentives of the hiring, the person who has the power to hire, so that they're looking for skills, then we're back to risk management, right? If I hire that white guy from Harvard that I've hired every single time before because I went to Harvard, and that guy fails, it's on me. But who's really gonna call me on having hired somebody from Harvard? I mean, come on. It's Harvard, right? But if I hire somebody who's skilled through alternative routes and they don't do well in the job, then, that's my fault because I didn't follow the traditional route. And so you have to change those incentives. You have to change the training, because what the organization really needs is not just people to solve problems today. It needs them to solve problems tomorrow. And people with that traditional training may not be as flexible because they were in this very narrow channel often in what they would learn, and they didn't learn how to use their skills in a range of different situations. And that makes them far less capable, far less prepared for what new kinds of problems they might need to solve tomorrow.
Well, I can see how this could be good because, traditionally it'd be very frustrating. Companies would experience required, which is like, okay, there's always the starting problem. How do you get experience if people want experience? Then when skills are outlined, is there going to be more apprentice-like situations where I'm a company, I want certain skills, and I don't want to sit there and train them on all of them, but in order to get who I want, I got to do something. So I'm willing to do maybe a 3 to 6 month like intensive apprenticeship type of thing. Then if they survive, they go to the full-fledged position. Is that what's going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen? I just don't see. It just seems like it takes a lot more effort to do the things you're talking about, which I think it would be great to do. I just don't know if I see companies and people doing it. It's just just because of the effort involved. It's like it's easier to say like experience involved, or is there experience required, or I want some proxy so I can just hire somebody. I don't have to worry about this skill and that skill and that kind of thing.
So this is a move. Within 5 years, 10 years, we won't be having this discussion because so many organizations will have made the shift to skills-based models. They will be able to point to great data that shows that this is what allows them to be able to have a much more flexible workforce, and it'll be the standard, right? So it's only in this in-between period where organization after organization is going through this adoption process. It's not perfect because, again, so many don't train the team guide. They don't train the manager to be able to understand what all the potential advantages are. But then also, as you say, we need to change some of the context, right? So if we think of this sort of binary thing of you either get a job or you don't get a job, those are the old rules of work. Instead, I encourage decision makers to be thinking about what I call a degree of membership, right? So an employee, a full-time employee that only works for you, that's 100% membership in your organization. And that's one of the old rules of work. There will always be traditional jobs, and there's always going to be people that only have one job. However, we are entering into an era where more and more work will be flexible. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the things that you have to do is you have to uncouple this whole idea that everything is a full-time job. And more organizations are adopting a model of internal work marketplaces. So they treat new job openings as opportunities to be able to leverage existing skills inside the organization, and then to try to break up those jobs into projects. And so there's a range of organizations I can talk about that have done this already. There's a massive organization in Europe called Schneider Electric. That's a poster child for this. But you create these internal work marketplaces, and it's all very project-based. And so on your team, you might have somebody who's 60% time with you, but then there's two other teams where a worker is 20% time. And the more flexible you can make that fabric inside the organization, and again, tremendous technologies like Arcasos to do this, then you actually have the operating system to help the organization to become this very flexible workplace. And what you'll do is you will create this magnet for young workers, because what your young workers want, all the studies are absolutely consistent. What young workers want nowadays is flexibility. They don't think of this, the surveys are all very, very consistent. They don't think of their employer as the place that they are going to be working for 20 or 30 years from now. They know that we live in a world of exponential change. They know that we live in a world of relentless uncertainty. And so they're always hedging their best bets. That's why I call this the era of optionality for young people. Well, that's an opportunity for employers. And so just to speak to what you're talking about. So yes, apprenticeships. Yes, having mentorship where your workers are mentoring young people. Even if they don't work for you today, they might work for you tomorrow. And you're identifying tremendous workers who could be a great fit for your organization. You're breaking up jobs into more project-based activities. And then the more you can try things out. So for instance, there's some startups that have software where you can take a job opening, you can break it up into 4 different 1-week projects and try out 4 different candidates to see how good a fit it is. Because it's the same thing for the worker. They want to know, are you a great employer? Are you a great place to work? Is this a great team? Is it a good fit for me? Companies like Google, my organization, Charette, we've done, I've got a small company called Charette Consulting Organization, and we've done projects with Google since 2005. When they hire a programmer, they don't hire them into typically a specific job. Every programmer, whether they went to Carnegie Mellon or a code camp, goes through the same training program to get them all a baseline of skills, and then they have to date around. They have to meet different teams, and eventually a team and the worker find a fit. And that's a flexible fabric of work. That's a set of workers who have much more mobility inside the organization. And that is doable by any organization.
Yeah, I like that, to hire for a project, and then if it works out, great. If not, because you're big enough, move to another department. But if you're not, at least just hire for a project to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And smaller businesses don't quite have that much flexibility, but there are techniques for them to at least to start to be more skills based. And then, try workers out, give them that time, give them that period. And then but you have to be really good at the process of talking through skills, figuring out what skills are really, really needed for different work roles, and then help the worker to determine, is this a good fit? Have you solved these kinds of problems before? Why don't you try out solving some of these problems? Be sure you pay them for the project. Don't just think of it as free work that somebody's doing, and then you'll be far more likely to get a good fit.
Yeah, because I could see it'll be hard to evaluate. Okay, I want these 7 skills if you're going to work at this job that I have for you. How do I know you got the skills? For right now, everything's a shortcut. Oh, you went to Harvard? Yeah, you probably get the skills, fine. But otherwise, how would I know? Without trying you out.
Well, absolutely. Or how would you know without trying? Because because my father was fond of saying that every job title is a poetic metaphor. It's so you're going to be a project manager. Well, what the heck is a project manager? I mean, there's 200 different kinds of project managers. So you always want to be testing it out yourself as a worker. And then you also, and this is critical for employers nowadays, you have to give young people a chance. Where else are they going to learn in the age of AI to do the kind of basic tasks, problem solving, working with teams, that sort of thing? If they didn't get it in school, where are they going to learn it? What is happening in the age of generative AI software is that a lot of the entry-level jobs are being pared away. Those repetitive jobs, those cruddy jobs that you and I did when we first started working. I delivered newspapers. I worked in the data processing company. You stuffed envelopes. Those are all being automated, right? They're all being automated. So all those entry-level opportunities are step-by-step being pared away. Organizations must find ways to be able to break up work, train young people in how to work, help them to be able to use their skills on the kinds of problems that they're best solving. And that has to become a superpower for the organization, because otherwise, and I tell this to CEOs around the world, you will not have the workers you need to solve problems in 5 or 10 years. If you can't crack this code now, I often say, look, I don't think this is a new generation. I don't use phrases like Gen Z and Gen Y. I say it's a new species. This is a new version of human. They have what I call a digital distraction device, otherwise known as a cell phone, and they have all this information about startups their friends are working on, jobs that their friends love or jobs their friends hate. And all of this used to be in the cone of silence. You never used to know what people made for their work. You never used to be able to post on places like Glassdoor about how good or bad you think a company is. And now all that information is out there. And so what we need to do if we're going to really hire young people and give them the opportunities that they need is to create this far more flexible learning and work environment. One of the things that Saul Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, has suggested is because so many people in existing jobs are going to get displaced, every organization should be taking 1% of their profit and devoting it to training, especially young people, to be able to do the next generation job. So think of those as internships, apprenticeships, mentorships, where you are giving back to the world because you want to be able to benefit from those young people having been trained when they eventually come to work at your organization.
Very good. So we're just about out of time. Is there an instruction manual on how to do this? Is that what you've written? Or
yeah, go to gbowles.com. Yeah, I've got a playbook on becoming a skills-based organization. In my book, The Next Rules of Work, I talk about mindset, skill set, and tool set. And I do that for the individual and for the team and for the organization. And then my courses on LinkedIn, learning mindset in the age of AI, learning agility in the age of AI, how to hire and develop your AI-powered workforce. And if any of your listeners don't have access to LinkedIn learning courses at their organization, if you just connect to me on LinkedIn and you tell me which course you want, I can give free access to any of those courses.
Okay. I know, of course, Coursera and places like that. I didn't know LinkedIn's doing that. That's great. It's fantastic. And Okay, so I guess companies are starting to be able to use pre-made courses like yours on places like LinkedIn for different types of organizations, so they can, like you said, turn into a skills-based organization.
Yeah,
that's actually
that as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the major deliverables. It's not the only one. You got to do this training for the team guide thing that I was talking about, but that's a key element.
Well, so Garrett, thanks so much for coming. And didn't mean to complain, but I guess I just been hit in the face with this transition period in terms of like my kids, and it just being a real big frustration. I'm glad that things appear to be coalescing in a new way that's going to work. Because right now it feels like an in between. It feels messy.
It is messy. I always say I have the greatest compassion for three groups of people nowadays: parents, teachers, but especially young people. You didn't ask to be born in this era. There's all these tremendous advantages to it, and we are in a transition period where what I hope is we're going to all co-create the next rules of learning and of work together.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks for coming.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.